Hello, my name is Thad Hall with Forest Marsh Group. In this video, we'll be talking about Section C of the Election Administration and Voting Survey. Section C covers domestic civilian absentee voting. Before we begin, it will be helpful for you to have two documents. First, a copy of the Election Administration and Voting Survey Instrument, and second, a copy of the Supplemental Instruction Manual that goes along with the survey. So what is in Section C? Section C is going to cover four issues. First, the total number of absentee ballots transmitted to voters in the 2016 general election. Second, the total number of permanent absentee voters in your jurisdiction and the number of ballots you sent to them. Third, the number of absentee ballots that were returned by voters, how many of these were counted and how many were rejected. And finally, the reason why absentee ballots were rejected. Before we begin going into the questions, it'll be helpful for us to review a couple of definitions. First, what is civilian absentee voting? Here, the EAC is using a traditional definition of absentee voting, by which they mean that absentee voting is when absentee ballots are transmitted to voters. Transmitted means that your office sent the voter a ballot via mail, email, or an online portal. Second, this section refers to civilian absentee voting. Civilian means that the voter who received the ballot was not a EAVS voter. So they were not an overseas citizen, they were not a member of the military, and they were not the spouse or dependent of military personnel. So the other aspect of understanding civilian absentee voting is understanding what isn't civilian absentee voting. It isn't in-person absentee voting. So for instance, if people can come to your election office and vote absentee in an early voting setting, that is not considered absentee voting under this definition. That's considered to be in-person early voting. And second, any type of EAVS absentee voting should be covered in Section B. So any ballots sent to overseas citizens, to military personnel, or their spouses and dependents, that should be reported in Section B. So Section C begins with question C1A, which is asking you to report the total number of ballots that were transmitted to voters. This is all ballots that you transmitted regardless of their final status. So any absentee ballot that was sent to a voter should be recorded in question C1A. So then in questions C1B, C1C, and C1D, you'll be reporting the number of ballots that were returned by voters, the number that were returned as undeliverable by the post office, and the number that were spoiled and replaced. Question C1F is asking you about the total number of absentee voters who voted on election day, but they had to cast a provisional ballot because they did not surrender their absentee ballot at the polls. So questions C1B, C1C, C1D, and C1F should be all the transmitted ballots that you sent out that you can account for. Question C1E is asking you to report the number of ballots that you sent out that were not returned by a voter, spoiled, or returned by the post office. So these are all the ballots you sent out that are not otherwise accounted for. For question C2, you're being asked if any individual in your jurisdiction can be a permanent absentee voter. So in your jurisdiction, if you allow individuals with a disability or a person over a certain age to register as a permanent absentee voter, you should answer yes to this question. And obviously, if your state has permanent absentee voting, you should answer yes as well. Question C3 is asking you to report the total number of absentee ballots that were sent to permanent absentee voters who have the status for any reason. So now in questions C4A and C4B, you're being asked to report the total number of absentee ballots that were counted and the total number of absentee ballots that were rejected. The most common reasons for absentee ballots to be rejected are: first, the ballot was returned after the deadline; second, the ballot lacked a valid signature; or third, the signatures on the envelope and the signature on file did not match. For questions C5A through C5V, the total number of reasons for ballots being rejected should equal C4B, which is the total number of civilian absentee ballots that were rejected and not counted. We appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. Most questions about the EAVS can be answered using the Supplemental Instruction Manual. However, if you need additional assistance, please do not hesitate to contact us at EAVS@forestmarshgroup.com. If you email us there, somebody will be back with you within 24 hours to answer any questions that you have. Thank you, and we appreciate your time.